expert of the day is Peter Cowdrey. Peter is a native Floridian, born in Clearwater and raised in Jacksonville Beach. Now, for a time, he and his family were residents on the 63-foot topsail schooner Conrad. It was there and during later employment and surveying that he developed his love of maps. He's a graduate of Bishop Kenny High School, the University of South Florida, and Florida State University. He holds a master's degree in history. He's a retired teacher from Leon County Schools and continues to serve as volunteer educator in residence at the Museum of Florida History in Tallahassee. Please welcome Peter Cowdrey.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you all. Let me begin this afternoon, and just take a moment here, but it's very important for me to share this with you. Let me begin this afternoon by thanking Ms. Catherine Currier, Library Associate, Special Collections, and her supervisor, Ms. Laura Miner, and all their staff here at the Jacksonville Public Library. They have been terrific. I've made 3 trips over here in advance of this, just helping to set up and getting things organized on our end of it. And there is no staff I've ever worked with that has ever been more helpful to me. Along with them is Mr. Justin Kaiser, Multimedia Specialist, and other individuals whose first names I know, but not much more: Gabby, Lisa, Hannah, Jay, and all others. Thank you. Just a few months ago, in the last days of October, I got a call from someone who identified herself as Catherine Currier. And it had to do with a recommendation she received from Mr. Michael Fisher, well-known Jacksonville attorney, and his daughter, Ms. Laura Lee Corbett, Tallahassee historian, to invite me to speak here on some aspect of Florida maps. Now, any aspect of Florida maps interests me. And being in this room with you, the analogy of a kid in a candy store comes easily to mind. I love it. I just think the Anspacher Gallery here is just amazingly, draws me in and keeps me here, I will tell you. I couldn't be more honored, as I told Ms. Currier, to accept that invitation. And I asked her to thank the whole Fisher family for me in the meantime as I was working on this. And it is true that I worked with the Fisher family in the past. We had a wonderful collaborative effort as I was asked to provide annotations for their 600-year collection of the Fisher collection of original historical maps, mostly of Florida, but additionally also of other places. And this is what heralded our state commemoration of the first voyage of discovery of Juan Ponce de Leon in 1513. Tallahassee was front and center in that effort, in the sense that those maps were gathered, they were conserved and put into a special map room within the capital, the historic capital of Florida, in the northeast section of the first floor. And from there, they just radiated interest into the rest of the state. And for the rest of that year, we entertained school groups and other groups that came to see and to know more about Florida's cartographic history. What an experience it was. So I thank everybody here with that. I'm going to move on and summarize this a little bit more. I thank the Museum of Florida History Director Lisa Barton and Mission San Luis Director Dr. Jonathan Shepard, because they were very much involved in the loan of the exhibits that you see that were put under glass that have to do with navigation. And as we go through this, I will occasionally touch on and cement the close links that there were and are still between the science of navigation and that of cartography and making maps and charts. They're intimately related. To all of you and all of them and to the entire Anspacher family, I thank you all, and we may begin. Thank you. We're going to start with the first map here. As you see, you've been looking at it along here to say, yes, I know where that is. It's always nice to know, and I'm going to break away here for a little bit. Hopefully you can hear me, teacher voice. Let's say we know where we are in Jacksonville, Florida. And that's a great thing because we have a point of beginning, and we will return to that at the very end. But along the way, we're going to see how Florida was conceived or was thought of, how people imagined what it was and where it was, how large it became and how small it shrank. So all of this is part of our story. We moved, let's see here to the second slide. If I can, Next, yes. There we go. Here we are. So northwest Florida, going over to the Perdido River in the west. And then the next slide will be the southern part of the state. And all these maps are provided DOT, courtesy, no charge. And well, we pay for it too. We know that, taxes. But still, think about it. What the explorers would not have given to see this reality that we take for granted. I mean, we just do. Think of maps that are wadded up in the back of somebody's seat and, it won't fold right and go get another one. It's just, these things, they enshrine a lot of history on them too. Different places of Florida still retain names that go way back. Las Tortugas, the islands of the turtles. Cabo Canaveral, the Cape Canaveral. Isla Morada, right at the mouth of the St. Johns River, Mayport, from the Rivière du May, that the French named it. It still retains the name Mayport there. And English names like Rawlstown and other places that are associated with Hillsborough, and other names in the south, Carysfort Reef. And then other Spanish names, Native American names, English names, and finally American names. And it's all kind of a stew of cartographical name places that are enshrined on any Florida map that you get. Let's go back to the beginning, though, just to get a point here where we're going. And let's see here. Once again, it timed out, I think. I apologize, folks. Let's see what we can do here. Trying to go to the next slide. I may need a little technical assistance if someone's there, and might want to stand by just for a bit. Can't make it go to the next slide over. I have no idea. Okay, thanks. I'll just leave it down there. Thank you. Appreciate it, Catherine. The assistance of Catherine Courier once again. Thank you, ma'am. Right, for sure. This is the first map that we have of the New World. It's just a chart. And there's a difference. A chart illustrates what we have as a coastline. And it doesn't say much about anything, really, about what's interior. That's more of a map. The chart is more for navigation and for use of navigators at sea. They want to know where the reefs are, where the shoreline is, where the shallows are, and where the deeps are, this kind of thing that will help them safely navigate in and around through the really dangerous places that they have never seen before. And along the way, they will sketch out a kind of a shoreline that will be added to again and again in our story. And so it will go. Now, this is 1492. Let's move forward just a little bit. And doggone it. You might want to just grab a chair here. Thank you, ma'am, once again. I can't make it get rid of that other thing when it comes up. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, yeah. Here we go with the year is 1500. And this is Juan de la Costa's understanding of the Caribbean and of the nearby areas. And almost everything, not everything, but almost everything is islands. And when you imagine this is, if I may step forward, just for identification, Cuba, Hispaniola, the islands of the Bahamas, northern coast of South America, and some unknown land to the north. And that's going to interest us now. We go to the next slide. What do you hit to make that go? I've got it here, but what then do you hit is the...
That doesn't need to be there, just...
I've been doing it, thank you. Yeah. This is going to be a team effort, I can tell you. Thank you, ma'am. Look here what you see. You've got a line here at the bottom. And we just inverted the map, by the way. And these are all English flags of the day. 1500, they've changed over the years. But here is a line that says, Mar descubierto por Inglese. This is the sea discovered by the Englishmen. And the Englishman they're talking about is John Cabot, who in 1497 sailed under the auspices of Henry VII in order to discover any land that might lie to the west. He disappeared on his second voyage, and we have just this reference to his exploration in the Spanish source that we have in front of us right now. There we go, so far. Thank you. Now we move forward just a little bit more, and the year is 1502, and we have a curious peninsula just off the coast of Cuba, and that has gained the attention of cartographers for at least the last century. They look at this and they wonder, could it be Florida? And the answer is, yes, it might be. But what we do not know is it exactly that? So we have to move into the possibility and then examine what is plausible in this. Could it be that someone wandered north and discovered a peninsula and brought back word of it, and it wound up on this pirated manuscript that wound up in Italy under the name of Contino Planisphere in 1502? And the thing about the peninsula that you're looking at to the west and a little bit north of Cuba is you can't see the names on it because of the scale of the writing and all. But some parts of this are notated in areas that just don't seem to fit Florida. And if you look at how the line is between the ends, that has led some people to believe that it could be Yucatan. Because one of the places that we hear about there, I mean, it's just, they do line up somewhat, but not the way we would expect to see it. Others think, well, it could be a peninsula in Asia. And there was the peninsula of Mangi that everyone in this side of the Atlantic in those years was expecting to find. That was a peninsula of China. Columbus was certain of it. His brother did a big map of it in 1504 in Italy, working with a fellow named Zossi. So we moved on now. Now it's 15. Excuse me. There we go. 1511. Peter Martyr, writing in a book called The Decades, illustrates this with a published map or a chart, more or less, of the Caribbean. And this is really interesting because it shows places we can identify and that are named. You can read them probably where you are. Insula de Española, that's Hispaniola, island of Cuba, and now this is Insula de Bimini Parte, part of the island of Bimini to the north. And the island of Bimini and the reports of it are what drew Ponce de Leon into the area of north and west from San Juan, from Puerto Rico. Okay. Here we go. I'm getting it now. We believe, people who look at this are fairly certain, that Gerald T. Milanich and Nara B. Milanich, working together at the University of Florida, did some historic work and some investigation in Florence and found a chart ascribed to an individual, Ottomano Freducci. And this is in the Archivo di Stato. This is in the archives of the government archives of Florence. Now, it doesn't look like Florida yet, but we can sort of fix that. There's a capital I right there, and the word Florida, Florda. Not a coincidence, probably. We can see it better, though, if we turn it upside down. And that's right here. Now, look at it. Now you can see it's above Cuba and it begins to take shape with the St. Lucie area right in here and with the Keys down in this area. Cuba is right to the south and so on. The Bahama Islands are over here. Now don't be too put off by these lines. They're called rooms, and they were drawn on blank charts for the navigators who were doing the discovering to pen in the coastlines as they would be discovered. And that's why they radiate out. The way they drew them was a big circle with 32 points, cutting and dividing it every which way you could, and then linking each circle with each other circle so that it's just a mishmash of straight lines. That is in order to allow them to calibrate with their magnetic compass and their record keeping. The compasses that they used were 32 directions. We use one now that's 360 and it's all marked in multiple ways more than theirs were. At the time that we're talking about, though, 32 directions were plenty enough. And therefore, the charts had those same lines on them that would match up with compass points. Now we get here a little bit. We go back just for a second here. I want to just remind you that the letter in front of Florida was the letter I. What does I stand for? I, period, Florida. There we go. You look down here in Cuba and it's called Insula Cuba, the island of Cuba. So I, Florida, must be the island of Florida. Now that's what he believed because it's all he had ever seen. Ponce de Leon has encountered multiple islands. This is one more, big to be sure, but an island. he thinks. And word of this gets back. Now remember, this is during the Renaissance. Everybody was reading and writing. The printing press had been developed in Germany in the 1450s, and it was being used now to just publish everything that was newsworthy all over Europe. Okay, so now we're moving in. We're going to do it again here. We're going to go to the next one, and it's this one. Now this chart is attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, and it is attributed to him because he was an inveterate reader and he was extremely creative in creating new forms of art and expression and science and everything else. He had a mind that was just unbelievably able to grasp things. And in this case, he hears about an island. He knows it's supposed to be close to the Orient. He's doing the whole world in two spheres, Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, and we're just looking at the Northern Hemisphere. The equator that you see going around on the outside of that connects with the other sphere, below which the name America appears on the South American continent. One of the early, but not the first, use of that term. Now we're going to turn it upside down again. You have to pardon me for doing this, but sometimes we don't recognize things unless we do invert them a little. Okay. Now take a look. This is all China. Cathay, right there. This is Jipangu. This is Japan, here. This square island is Terra Florida. In 1514, that made a lot of sense. But it takes a long time to get a report across the ocean. So you work at it and you try at it, and lo and behold, somebody else comes in with other information. And that's what we're going to see in just a second here. And that's this. What is Florida? The answer, let's explore it and see. So the 1519 expedition of Pineda charts what turns out to be the peninsula of Florida. And I guess you can see the cursor here as I slide it along. Is that right? No? Okay. Well, let me step up here and do it this way. From the East Coast, this is it's very hard to read. It says, La Florida que decía Bimini que descubierto Juan Ponce. This is the land of, it used to be called Bimini, that today is called the land discovered by Juan Ponce. Has to be Florida. So when you go around there this way, the Bay of Carlos, perhaps Tampa Bay, other features that are here, the river of the Holy Spirit, right there, that's the Mississippi, and on around to Texas of today, and the Yucatan Peninsula, and on and on. Florida now is a peninsula, and it is attached to America. That is something that comes out of this expedition of 1519. And we're going to go further here. And this is the absolutely first printed, published map of Florida. And it's a little hard to see, but it's right over here, La Florida. And it's given so that people who read this map, they're not so much interested in Florida, but they kind of know where it is. But now Cortez is in Mexico, and he's writing back with what's happening over there. And this map is produced to give you the understanding of where Mexico is in relation to another place that's fairly newly discovered, that's Florida, or newly encountered. And so now we have this, and this is Yucatan, described here as an island. And the point of Cuba is called Punta de Cuba, and that's the western, we would call it Cabo San Antonio today, that part of Cuba. Okay, now, there are still difficulties here, and we come up now, and people are grasping like, what, where, tell me more. And, Thomas More is writing Utopia, about this place that doesn't exist, but could. And all the possibilities that we might find there, and all sorts of wonders that people are reporting about, and others that are expected that they have not yet found, some that they would never find, by the way. So we look at the next map here, and this is by Orange Finet, who was a French map maker, and in 1519, he produces this globular, this Mappamundi, they call them, map of the world, and I have to go to the slide to show you something, but here we have a peninsula, and this is Cathay and Tibet, and this is Europe. There's Italy, and here's Spain and Portugal. There's Florida. Now, I honestly, I really don't criticize them then. They didn't know. They didn't know. They were wondering, is it or could it be? Maybe it had. All these thoughts are ricocheting through their minds. And in the middle of all this, other reports are happening and other things are taking place. This map was drawn in 1519, but it wasn't published until 1531. Unfortunately for Orange Finet, there was something else taking place in those years. And that was the expedition and the sailing around the world attempt that Magellan was underway with. And we know that of the 5 ships that set out, 1 came back, others disappeared. Only 1 vessel of all of them survived to tell the tale. And according to the records we have of Antonio Pigafetta, who was one of the survivors of that, it's a horrendous story. If you have never read the story of Magellan's survival, believe me, if you open it, you can't put it down. You'll be up a lot of hours tonight looking at it if you so choose. What happened, though, was they even arrived back on the wrong day, if you can believe this. They were keeping records, but they didn't know. And geographers had to explain to them the Earth is so large that there is the concept of an international dateline, which is brand new to them. The other thing is it took them so long to sail that now they had to make room in their minds, the understanding of the world that it was far larger than they thought. The world wasn't big enough to crowd everything what they thought they had. Now there's this continent of South America, and there's wide Pacific Ocean, and all of the extent of Asia, and they're still not back in Europe. They still have to negotiate the Indian Ocean around the continent of Africa, and somehow elude the Portuguese authorities before they get back. And they do survive. That's one of the most important parts of it all. But now they had to think, the Earth is much larger. Ptolemy was wrong. You know, he underestimated the world, and even this is the Renaissance, and we rediscover all these writings. Every now and then, it could lead them astray, and this is one of those times that it did. So they had to correct the size of the world, and now they're on better track to do that. We're going to go right to the next one here, because this is one of the 15, this is a very early one here, 1522. I understand it's the rarest and just stay with rarest document that you have in this collection, and it's the Tabula Terra Nove of Lorenz Fries, and it's 1522. Why this is problematic for cartographers today is it represents the same problem we have as that early peninsula that we saw on the continental planisphere. And we would see it again in some of the maps of Waldseemüller. It just can't be easily described. Let me look and show you just one thing. Along the top of it here is a place called Costa Alta. That is a high coast, like cliffs, you might think. And they can't reconcile that with Florida. It's one thing, but it's one thing alone wouldn't discount it. But there's something else. There's a place here called Rio de los Lagartos, the river of alligators. Now, to some, that's proof this is Florida. Go to the St. Johns River. This is where we are. But to others, they go, wait, there's a Danish cartographer and some others that say, well, just a minute. In Yucatan Peninsula, there is a place today on the north coast named Rio de los Lagartos, and it is a great tourist attraction. I don't know that I can tell you why it is, but it's well known is my point. And it's very much associated with the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, does that mean this is or isn't Florida? We just don't know. But one of the principal areas of concern is that he has labeled it Parias up here, P-A-R-I-A-S. Parias was named by Christopher Columbus on his 3rd voyage, just before the year 1500, and it was a place near the mouth of the Orinoco River. When Waldseemüller did his map, apparently that name got transferred more in the region of Central America, and by the time it comes to Lorenz Fries, he's moved it up into, if that is America, that you see there, to the north and west of Cuba, not far from where we might be today. But it is problematic, and people are debating all the time, what is happening here? What is it really? And the honest answer is we really don't know. I'm a retired teacher. One of my great students, Peter McCary, is here right now with his family. Good to have you aboard, sir. And I will tell you that it's something that we tell our students, we don't have all the answers. We don't know. Maybe you can fill in the blanks in this regard. And that's the exciting part of fields like cartography. We just still are looking. And it will be somebody who has fresh ideas, perhaps, that will take that in. Now we continue. The Spanish are not the only people interested in this region, and we have the voyage of Giovanni Verrazano. Now, it is amazing how many of these explorers have Italian names. Christopher Columbus, Cristobal Colon, okay? Amerigo Vespucci, okay? Now we have Giovanni Caboto from sailing for England. Now we have Giovanni de Verrazano for France. Everywhere we go, some of the best and the most experienced and the most recognized and most famous of the navigators of this whole period happen to be from places that we call now Italy. We have to remember that there was no unified Italy yet. Italy was a peninsula of city-states, but where people had the wherewithal, the scientific understanding, and the knowledge and the drive to do something with it, they had to go elsewhere for the sponsorship because they couldn't find it locally. And so they did. Now we have this map, and the interesting thing about it is, right in the middle of what would be the east coast of the United States, there is this body of water. I have to say parenthetically that map makers are notorious for including things that they fear and that they want. If you really don't want something and you can do things there, map makers have a lot of freedom. I mean, honestly, they do. And I take my hat off to all of them. I mean, you know, when you don't know and you're dealing with new concepts all the time, you do the best you can. Okay. The usual understanding of this map is that where the French were sailing just outside of the outer banks of North Carolina, they could see across the spits of land and what was keeping them from the interior, like Pamlico Sound, and they could not see beyond that to see that there was any coastline past those barriers. So they left it open, very open. It goes all the way, this arm goes to the Pacific Ocean. And they are hoping this is what they find. Now, I have to say, there's not much interest in Florida, not much in what is now the United States. This is a great barrier. And what people were constantly looking for was a way through it all. Whether it's Henry Hudson later, mistaking the Hudson River and Hudson Bay for the passage, or whether it's people further south probing. What they could not understand was this vast landmass from the frozen north to nearly the frozen south with no way through. It's just amazingly difficult geographically to understand that. But now look what happens next. We have this Sebastian Munster Map this is a 1545. There's some doubt about its date, but we can round it off to that. This is a Latin map, Novae Insulae, the New Islands, map of the New Islands. And there's a little German line, the New Welt here, the New World, and some of it is in Spanish, Cuba, Terra Florida, there it is, there we are. Now, Terra Florida at this point is unbounded, but it gets sandwiched between the Mississippi River and the East Coast and goes as far north as that Sea of Verrazano, which, as we know, doesn't exist, but it's here as a kind of a marker to let us know that the land of Florida is now, not only is it a peninsula, but it has grown some in the mind of the cartographers, and that will continue. Every day, I have to get into my other side, part of my life here. Today is Children's Day at the Museum of Florida History, and were I not here with you, I would be at the museum doing this with the kids, explaining how you find your way and you plot your noonday position. Every day at local apparent noon, you make a little pinprick on the chart and you hope that you've done it correctly and that this is where you are now. No landmarks when you're at sea, so you just kind of go through the procedures, and they're very involved. They're very scientific as they can be in the day that we're talking about. And each day at noon, you try and make that your noonday position, and you will do it again tomorrow and the day after. There is a collection of navigational instruments that was published in as the frontispiece for the Mariner's Mirror in 1588, an English publication. And they decorate the frontispiece that you see here with all manner of navigational instruments. And it was to make the point that the maps that follow depend on these instruments. And you have, not to spend a lot of time, but you have a quadrant for measuring to getting the North Star in your sights and in the northern hemisphere anyway, determining your latitude. Astrolabes, cross staffs, even the lead line to measure the depth. And all of these instruments, or most of them, versions of them, are on display, courtesy of Catherine Currier, who mounted them and labeled them in the glass cases that we have right just before you came in here, and hopefully you'll get a chance to visit again. But without those instruments, maps could not exist. And the map makers in Europe took all of these pilots' reports, and it was done by nation, a lot of secrecy there, but eventually they put them together and had what they thought was an educated understanding of the shape of an island or the drift of the angle of a coastline or whatever it may be. Now, several years ago, when the Fisher map exhibit in Tallahassee, one of the features was it had a case, an exhibit case showing much of the same thing, and they had the traverse board for recording the distance made good at the bottom and the course made good at the top. All life at sea was regulated by the turn of the half-hour glass, and we put a peg in for the direction there and also for the speed made good. Noonday sightings are taken with an astrolabe like this brass astrolabe here. Nighttime readings, as I mentioned, are taken with a quadrant on Polaris, and this is a compass here that shows the 32 directions. You can't easily see it, but it just is fortuitous today. Because I just happened to be walking by that case over there, and I saw that, wow, they have National Geographics going way back. And there is something that I invite you to look at, and it's the November 1986 National Geographic, page 575, which shows you a wonderful version. This is a 15th century survival of the mariner's compass, decorated with the Virgin Mary and her sign, the fleur-de-lis at the top for purity, and then the Christ child in her lap is pointing to the direction east, which is marked with a small cross. Over and over and over in the maps themselves and in the charts, we will find those markings. Fleur-de-lis for north, cross for east. It isn't universally done, but it was largely and often done, as we will see. One thing that was introduced by the English was the chip log, and the chip log was an instrument for measuring distance through the water. The idea was 30 seconds worth of sand is 1/120th of an hour. So if in 1/120th of an hour, you knew how many knots had gone over the taffrail, if they're spaced 42 feet apart, reckoned then as being 1/120th of a mile, if you put all that together, it would work sort of like your speedometer does, and it would give you how many knots you were doing. Now, this is good in theory. In theory, very good. The problem is the geographers back in England tell these navigators, you got it wrong. It's not 42 feet, it's more like 50 feet. You have to lengthen this out. And the upshot of that was that because of this disparity, there were retained, or the difference emerged between a statute mile at sea, on land, and the nautical mile at sea. And the nautical mile was born because it gave the English measurement, when it was properly done, exactly 60 in a degree at the equator, which meant that every nautical mile was 1 minute of arc, and it was easy to calibrate and use. So, yeah, gotcha, thank you. Now next one is going to be the Gutierrez Map. This is in 1562, and it's an understanding that there's really the Spanish Terra Florida is up here, pushed pretty far away from the boundaries that we would think of as ours right now. Up into this region, I mean, co-equal with just about Virginia and so on. And the only other claim up here is Terra Francisca, which is the French claim. They're moving a little bit down in this period. We will see how this changes a little bit, especially locally. But now just a little bit earlier than this is a little out of sync, but there's a reason for it. In 1555, a Frenchman named Guillaume de Testu, who was a Huguenot, a person who was very pro-French and really wanted to see a colony of Huguenots somewhere on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. And he produced this map because he said, somewhere there is a place for you. He warned them that if you look to the west, you have the coat of arms of Spain and a flag. And up here, the flags are half moons and suns. And what that says is there's no European claim there. So you could come, and you might come, and you might establish yourself. And in the course of time, that does happen, as we know. And the The Jacques Lemoyne map of 1564, engraved later by Theodore de Puy in 1591, is the cartographic representation of the city of Jacksonville, as we all know. It's one of the maps that we have here in this wonderful gallery, and a little different form of it. Maps then were produced, but they weren't in color form. There was no technical way to do that. So colorists added color to give extra value and understanding to the map that they had. We look at this, and there is so much information on this map. I'll just point out one or two things. There's a very great lake here, upstream from us, and it said lake. It's in Latin. Lake so large that from one side to the other you cannot see. Lake George, part of the river system in, with receiving it. And there's also another designation that says this place is 180 leagues from the city of Charlesfort, or Charles Fort, or we would think of as Santa Elena, or even Parris Island, South Carolina, which is where an early French fort was, and they were, describing the distance between them. The mapmaker claims all of this for France, and there's the French coat of arms, and this, he says, that's all Spanish. Don't worry about that. This up here, we don't know. Is that body of water part of that old Sea of Verrazano that we saw? Maybe. Okay, now we're going to move through, and we're going to look at this map of the 1580s. And this is the one that's a beautiful map of Ortelius Chavez. And it's the north, it's published with permission, and it goes up to the area of Virginia at least, and beyond probably. But there are no borders marked. It's just a claim. It's just a claim. At the time this was done, the French are gone, but now you have the English very interested in the east coast of this country, especially under Queen Elizabeth I. We'll move rapidly past this next one. This is a map, Gerard Marketers Map. He's the one who gave us isogonic cylindrical projection, which was the Mercator projection that I grew up with, seeing the world projected that way. He invented it to allow navigators to sail straight to their destinations without having to account for the curvature of the Earth, and it seemed to work fine then and there. It's been modified a lot since with other forms of projection. Now, this is one that brings us close to home too. This is the overseas attack by Francis Drake and his large fleet of British followers as they attacked all or much of the Spanish holdings in the years just before the Spanish Armada. One of the places they attack and destroy is St. Augustine before stopping up into Virginia. You can see the flag of St. George here. Virginia, to give assistance to the colony there. We think of as Roanoke, and we know that the colony does disappear, and the English have been as unsuccessful as most other nations have been in establishing their first efforts at colonization. They're not finished with it, and it will come back. And so we continue to go. This is 1597 here with Florida, extending well west of the Mississippi River and up into this region with Apalche, a corruption of the name Appalachia, which should be over in West Florida, but many of the map makers put it further to the north, and it's kind of problematic, but it's all considered Florida. Now we have William Johnson Bleu, 1640, who produces this map of Virginia, Florida. He has an English coat of arms here. He has a French coat of arms, though the French are not there now, but no Spanish coat of arms. So you know where his sympathies lie. And it's this sort of competition that is going to mark the history of this coast now for quite some time. This is Guillaume de Lille. Now, the year is 1703. We have fast-forwarded it to a terrible war that broke out in Europe after the death of the Spanish king and the War of the Spanish Succession, it was called over there. And Queen Anne's War is what it was called here. And it was devastating for Florida and for where we are. And the reason is because Colonel Moore of South Carolina, who was the governor there, attacked this region in 1702. He could not take the city of St. Augustine, though he valiantly tried. The fort that had just been completed was just too strong for him to take. He had to retreat, and he faced disgrace because of the failed effort. 2 years later, he attacks the area of Tallahassee, modern-day Tallahassee, because of the mission district that was there. And in the forays that happened up there across the state, across what is now the state of Florida, Indian villages, missions are destroyed, and the population is heavily reduced as British and their Native American allies from the Carolinas take slaves back from Florida. It virtually depopulates the peninsula. I don't want to overdo that, but it so reduces the population that other Native Americans will wander in, and they will find places that they recognize have been settled before, but no one is there. This is one of those expeditions mapped. This is Herman Mall, and he maps this. This is the slave expedition of Thomas Naren. Came all the way through the Florida Peninsula here, taking slaves as far south almost as the Keys, and going back. And it was just one of these slave expeditions that Florida faced. Spain could do nothing about it. They could protect the city of St. Augustine, at least the Castillo de San Marcos, but they couldn't do much in the way of any of their allies further south or further west. And the English knew it, and of course took advantage of it. Later, there will become established in 1733 in this debatable land with so much competition between the English in South Carolina and the Spanish in Florida. What was going to happen to the land between them? England moves fairly quickly on this, and in 1733 established as the colony of Georgia. It's still not marked easily with boundaries and so on, but that would change in the course of time. But before that happens, another war breaks out, and this is one of the maybe the best example and the most tragic of a real world war in the colonial times, and that is the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, which fought in the Philippines, fought in Africa, fought in India, fought on the oceans, fought in North America, fought in Europe, fought everywhere, between this massive group of allies on one side and a similar one on the other. And at the end of that, France had lost its holdings in North America. And the people who most benefited from it were the English. And we're going to see this this next map here shows what they did with their claim. There we are. This is a map of West Florida over here, all the way to the Mississippi, because the French are gone on the side. And then here they're going to divide it at the Apalachicola River, and everything east of that will be East Florida. Now it says it's drawn from the best authorities, but as you look at South Florida, you might not agree. You know, there's a lot of wide spaces there, and it looks like water courses and so on. Not being mean about it, but it just doesn't look that modern or that accurate. And there's a reason. There were some instruments that were about to come in that would change everything. And one of them that you see is the reflective tools or instruments. The octant was one and the sextant was another. And what they do is increase the accuracy of sun sights so that they are right, absolutely correct. And along with that comes a new idea invented by William Harrison to secure the English prize of 20,000 pounds for anybody who could come up with a foolproof way of finding longitude at sea. He worked his whole life on this effort, and he was so old at the end that he couldn't even take it for a trip. So he had to turn it. Oops, I'm sorry. Where are we going here? I got to go back to there. He worked on this until he got H4 and H5, and this then would give him the prize. And now it was a Frenchman who discovered a way to minimize the current chronometer and make it small and just as accurate. And pretty soon ships were beginning to sail with these things internationally. And we'll look what happens to the maps. This is the harbor of Pensacola. George Gauld surveyed it and went on to survey all of the Florida West Coast. The result of that can be seen just a few years later when we look at this map. Just look at the modernity of the map that you're looking at there. 1794. It was a cartographic, it was a navigation chart, but it was based on the work of George Gauld, as Master Charles Roberts includes in his dedication in this part of the map called the cartouche, in that circle there. Man, I tell you, I need a person here who is just going to turn slides, I think, if I can get it. You mind staying here and just we're almost done, so if we can just, there we go. This chart is one Lowry and Whittle of London, and it's at the end of the American Revolution and everything else. This shows a line in West Florida and East Florida that connects over to it's supposed to be through the Okefenokee Swamp and then up somehow through the St. Mary's River. But it would be Andrew Ellicott that would survey that line and get it as close to accurate as anybody possibly could. You can advance it that way. Ooh, that helps. Right. This is the Carey and Lee map of 1822. We're almost done now. It's a good thing because we have questions and answers. But the 1822 map shows Florida between the Perdido River and the Atlantic Ocean. 31 degrees here. Down here at the confluence of the Flint and the Chattahoochee is a point, and it goes straight to the headwaters of the St. Mary's River, and then down through the St. Mary's River, and everything there is Florida. Now it's so big, you can't really deal with it. So military governor Jackson divides it. Not at the Apalachicola River where the Spanish had divided East Florida and West Florida, but he moves it over to the Suwannee. And everything in West Florida is Escambia. And everything in East Florida is St. John's, the two parent counties in all of the state of Florida. And from them, all other counties would be derived over the years. There was one little problem with that, and that is the line between Florida and Georgia was not surveyed accurately according to Florida authorities. And so they worked at it and continued to work at it, and over the decades, finally Georgia gave in and allotted the brown land that you see here in the middle, from the Watson line to the Florida-Georgia line that it is today. It's about 1 mile in distance from south to north, but that's a lot of square miles when you add it up. To this day, it is still surveyed along the Georgia concepts, but it is now Florida land. And in 1970, not that many years ago, they ran the same line separating Georgia and Florida out to sea. They moved it up from where it had been to where it is now, and then solidified that. Now, really quickly, because we have about 2 minutes left before questions. If you go to the Museum of Florida History, thank you. I'll just stand over here. If we can work together here for a minute. There's a handle that they invite you to pull. The sea level is up here, which is, down below, where it was 12,000 years ago. And when you pull the handle, the sea level comes up. So it's an interactive exhibit that shows young people and their parents something about where we were and where we are. You let it back down, you bring it back in. Along behind that is a chart that shows where the Florida coasts were and where the national ones, where the, continental ones were. All these coasts and the islands and so on, they had much more reach because sea level was 100 feet lower than it is today. And that meant that Tampa would be about in the middle of the Florida Peninsula and not on the western edge of it. So it's food for thought. Now we go forward a little bit more. This is the St. George Lighthouse. This was photographed about 1950. It's much, much older than that, but someone thought it would be a really good thing to photograph. And so they did. Now we fast forward. The year is 1999, and you've got this problem with lean. You've got the water lapping at the foundations, and everyone is worried, when will it fall? We can't climb it anymore. It's too dangerous, and it was. And then in 2005, Ms. Debbie Hooper photographed it just after it fell into the Gulf of Mexico. Now this is anecdotal. You say, well, maybe. Well, let's go to the next slide and look at this. This is Miami, and this is happening more and more frequently. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that to you. I hope you can see the other stuff. Yeah. It's a king tide that's come in, and they happen regularly now down there, and it really is worrying people. And our governor today has established a task force, and the legislative session is still in, as we know, it just started. But the task force is looking at the influence of this seawater in Florida and what it is doing and what can we do about it. We are very vulnerable because so much of our occupied coast and the most heavily population is along the worst and the most vulnerable part of our coast. So it's not just true in Jacksonville, it's true everywhere. I've got family down in the Sarasota area, and their houses are just a little above high tide water. Everyone is worried about it. So what will happen about it? We just have to stay tuned and keep in touch. This is a satellite map. It's the Landsat image of 1973. And that helps us to keep an eye on things from that perspective, so we can measure all of this. And the last slide we have is almost the last slide there, which is where we started. I want to bring you safely back and comfortably back, and we hope you enjoyed your flight. Thank you very much. Sorry about the little bit of learning curve that we had, but I'm slow on matters like this, believe me. And everything changes. One of the problems I had this week was losing some things in the computer system and in some of the USBs, and I was terrified that it would not get put together in time here, but it did. And so I thank all of you, and I'll open it up now for any questions there may be. Yes, sir?
Your slides available on the internet?
They are, for the most part, they are. You have to look kind of widely for them. What I'm going to do is put them together in a program for the Museum of Florida History, and they will be obtainable through them. I'm working with the curator of education over there is Trampus Alderman, and he has asked me to do a number of reenactments, navigation, and also the map programs. And that is in the works as we speak. So I will, I'll tell you what, we're going to have, there will be a syllabus handed out to all of you. This is a bibliography for all kinds of additional reading on everything that we've talked about, and it has my name and contact information there. And I invite you to ask any questions you have. And I apologize again. I'm so sorry I blocked you there for a little bit. I didn't mean to do that. Yeah. Go ahead. Anyone? Yes.
I was wondering if the place in Tallahassee that you mentioned that has all these maps, is that open to the public?
It's the museum where I'm working through is the Museum of Florida History. But you mentioned something, because a number of these maps, and they are open because it's a state library. The state library and the state archives, Florida State Archives, they not only have the maps that are similar, and in some cases just virtually identical to what is here, but they also have photographic plates mounted onto cardboard, more miniaturizing them for closer study. So they are open to the public, and they'll be happy to help you. There's also a way you can do this through Florida Memory. You can access a number of their sites that way. And thanks to the wonderful Fisher family, a lot of the state archives have been bolstered by the engravings and the other materials that they donated in years gone by. Round of applause for the Fisher family, please.
I'm interested in the relationship between the navigators and the cartographers. Did the people who are making these maps ever get to communicate with each other?
In a way. If I may explain that a little bit better, the navigators came home, and in the case of, there was, let's go to 1529, there was an individual named Juan Vespucci. He was the nephew of Amerigo Vespucci, and at this point in his life, he was the chief pilot, piloto mayor, in the whole Spanish world. And every time ships came back, they would give their reports on everything, and he would get them. And he would take their drawings of reefs, and their drawings of river mouths, and their drawings of, you got the idea, everything. And he would put them together in his best understanding as a composite of what does North America look like? Where are we here with regard to Cuba and Yucatan? Is Yucatan an island, or is it a peninsula? Things like that would just keep coming up, and they made a lot of mistakes, and they knew they were making them, but they didn't know which ones were mistakes. That's bad, but it's good. I mean, in a way, because you move forward, and the next report that comes in is more reliable, and you say, oh, this is good. Now, one thing that was hard to grasp, really hard to grasp, was that false sea of Verrazano. Remember, it went off into this direction? Think about it. It went north and west. What does that remind you of in terms of nomenclature and a well-known feature that people looked for? The what? Northwest Passage, right. And you couldn't find it where Giovanni Verrazano thought it was. And they keep looking, and they think now they have found a way through in northern Canada, only though because the ice has melted enough to allow more frequent passage. That's going to be something the nations of the world will have to regulate because it has amazing and not always good ramifications for wildlife and everything up there. So they'll have to be very careful when it comes to that, but it probably will, and we'll just have to see that. Does that answer that? Oh, yeah, yes. You started in England, too. And the other thing is, if you were an English captain and you captured a Spanish vessel, one of the first things you would do is grab the logbook and the charts and any reports that you had and instruments and sometimes navigators. And each one would learn from the other through warfare, through trade, and sometimes there were alliances. For a long time, England and Spain were very close. In the early years of the reign of Henry VIII, they were very close. And Spanish navigators taught the English, and the English taught the Spanish, and so it would go. And between England and Holland, when it was fighting against Spain for its independence, looked for allies, and it found them in the English. It was temporary, we know, because halfway through the 17th century, they're at war. But for the moment, they're interacting with each other. The book that I shared with you called The Mariner's Mirror, that was first produced in Dutch, and it was a Dutch book, and was only translated in 1588 into the English that we have. As I say, they had good reasons to cooperate against Spain. That was also, if you remember, the year of the Armada, 1588, the same year the Mariner's Mirror book was published. And so it went. Yes, sir?
You already mentioned that one of the explorers was coming through Florida and capturing slaves.
Yes.
And I was wondering, who was he capturing and where was he taking?
Okay, he had his eye, first of all, the English had been attacking in North Florida back to the later years of the 17th century. In the 1680s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, you're hearing more and more of the depredations along a line of missions that ran from St. Augustine westward to Tallahassee. And many of them were being attacked and obliterated, as they were also along the north coast between what is today St. Augustine and up to the region of, you would say, the Georgia coast. They were just being hit and hit and hit. And as that was happening, one of the things that Colonel Moore realized was, in order to recoup his fortunes that he lost in trying to attack St. Augustine, and this is the last question I'm told, what he had to do, what he turned to, I should say, was this traffic in human beings, which he could get. He could take. There's a book called Red Indians that I could get you some information on, and it has to do with the slavery being extended to Native American victims of it, and it happened largely in the South Carolina area, and the victims of it were pulled out of Florida. And the most amazing group of that, these are people who had stood against everything, all the centuries of Spanish rule up until then, and it was the Calusa. And what brought the Calusa down finally was the English depredations directed against them. And then they just were gone from where they had been. I thank you, and I do invite you, if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know.